Noting the time and the presence of a quorum, I call this meeting of the Acton Finance Committee to order. The town, in response to the COVID-19 coronavirus, is currently following the guidance from the Acton Board of Health, Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding the virus and steps communities can take to prevent the spread. And thus we are running this meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please click on the link in our agenda, or from a telephone, dial 646-876-9923 and enter webinar ID 976-1599-8775. Telephone users may dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting. Computer and app users may use the raise hand feature to request to speak. That being settled, first item on our agenda is public participation. Do any members of the public wish to speak? Looks like we have Mr. Martin with his hand up.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
So I know the FinCom has been discussing the definition of capital, and I'd just like to chime in with an opinion. So capital for municipalities is different than capital in the private sector. Among other things, there's no depreciation for municipalities. And for municipalities, I think the main thing to consider for any item of discrete size is if it's non-recurring. If it's a recurring expense, I think it should be in a departmental operating budget. Otherwise, it's capital. Hypothetically, let's assume that we always buy 2 new police cruisers every year. I believe we should consider them as expenses, kind of like supplies. However, if DPW trucks are purchased irregularly as old ones wear out, they should be considered capital. Other one-time expenses, like a contract to review zoning laws, also should be considered capital. We should avoid putting one-time expenses in departmental operating budgets where they mess up year-to-year comparisons. General funds and leasing can be used for either operating expenses or one-time expenses, but reserves and bonding can only be used for one-time expenses. I agree with comments of the FinCom members saying that we should strongly consider leasing for items like computers that have limited service life. However, leasing does not define the expense as one time or not. Leasing can be used in my first example to regularly purchase cruisers or irregularly purchased trucks. In the latter case, there's little difference from debt service. To me, we should not treat a one-time contract for a service differently than from the purchase of a truck. Neither should be part of the operating budget. Either can be paid for from reserves, and both might be delayed to the following year if we're in a tight budget situation. Maybe that's the problem. In the context of the town, I consider, maybe the name is the problem. I consider that one-time expenses and capital to be synonymous. Finally, there's been some talk of aligning municipal and school capital items. We can do that for large building-related expenses, but not for anything else. The town does not have visibility to school district capital. It's all part of the assessment. Thank you.
David, just for clarity's sake, can you just say if that came from you as your capacity as select board member, or you as a citizen of Acton?
Oh, that's just me.
Okay, I thought so. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you very much.
Oh, then we don't have to pay attention?
No, you don't have to pay attention.
All right, excellent. Any other community members or attendees? Doesn't look like anybody else is watching or has their hands up. Okay, so we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the FY23 budget. We all attended the presentation by the town staff, and I would love our initial thoughts now that we've had time to review the budget, have our questions asked and answered, and then have each department present. So does anybody want to start? All right, everybody loves the budget and wants no changes and thinks that it's great and we can move forward. Oh, Mr. Noon, please.
Wants no changes is a pretty, great leap from thinking it's a well put together document. It was a good presentation. Wants no changes has a lot more to do with things we'll discuss later. How do we stack up? If we count the school assessment against the ALG revenue plan. what concerns I have on the budget are less about the documentation or how it was put together. I'm concerned that we have so many unsettled contracts, both on the town side and the school side. We like to settle contracts with like 2.5% increases, and that's when there is no inflation. I shudder to think what we may be looking at when there is 6% inflation, and we have to make a deal for 3 years. So I know there's a compensation reserve in the town manager's budget, which essentially I think they built in about 2.8% on the salary line. I think the compensation reserve would add another 2% to it. I just don't know that that's enough. And my issue comes more around what would happen if we settle, during the year for more than we've got in the budget. I mean, the short answer is we take it out of free cash, or we cut the current year's expenditures down so that we can cover it. So I'm a little concerned that we have some exposure on that. And other than that, when I see how this budget plus what the school and Minuteman assessment look like, then we'll know just how much we like certain projects and how much we don't. That's all.
Excellent, thanks. All right, Roland, go ahead.
My concern is around hiring. We seem to be adding a bunch of new positions. And I guess the question is more, is it a want versus a true need? To come back to my things all the time, wants versus needs. Lots of wants, but do we really need? Which drives, we keep adding positions. Not saying that all of them are unwarranted, obviously, and we have to backfill and things like that, and we got to think contingency planning down the road with people retiring and things like that, and we got to be able to backfill that pretty quickly. So our taxes have gone way up because of the new school, new fire station, etc. And I'm afraid that they're eventually going to come to us and say, "Oh, we're going to need to staff that North Acton fire station. We're going to need to add four new personnel or 6 new personnel or whatever, or 7 or 8 or whatever." And the budget's just going to keep going and escalating higher and higher and higher. Money's going to come from somewhere, right? And so I think we really need to look at what we have and what we need versus what it'd be nice to have, because we can do it. That's kind of what my concern is. I mean, that goes right into the budget negotiations as well. I mean, into salary negotiations and contract negotiations. Maybe give and take on each side.
Christy and then Isha.
I was thinking along similar lines to what Roland said as I listened to the discussion about adding a renter's advocate during the select board meeting last night. And it occurred to me that there's something that's been left out of the general public discussion. We're always talking about adding things. And one thing that we worry about in FinCom is adding full-time employees, because they pretty much stick around, a position sticks around, and it doesn't tend to get removed. But we don't ever talk to people. We don't hear in the public discussion the idea of adding a service might mean taking another one away. They touched on this in the select board yesterday, in that there are a need for a variety of social services, and looking at whether putting all of that money into a renters only advocate is the right way to do it, or should there be a position that can handle more? Are there other ways it should be held. And I think that was a very good step in the direction. I wish we were hearing more about, okay, we have a sustainability director now. What does that mean we're not doing? And getting people the idea that, yes, we have high taxes, or it feels like we have high taxes and they're paying for all of these things, but they're decisions we made. And we can't just keep adding to that. Sometimes you take things away that you want, and it's really hard to get people to take things away. But it was a little difficult for me listening last night, hearing very, very good comments by a bunch of renters complaining about how the rent goes up every year. And I kept sitting there thinking, you know, before I had a house, I thought you just paid a mortgage. Naively, it didn't occur to me that your payments go up every year because your taxes go up every year. So as a previous landlord, I'm like, yeah, the rent goes up every year because you have to cover the increase in taxes every year. It's not a like mean money grubbing thing. It's the expenses of having a unit go up every year. And I'm kind of get the sense that that's not being talked about much. So there's this idea of what do we need, but maybe sometimes we also should be cutting back on some of what else we do have for it. Looking at the overall budget, I once again am left with the feeling that we could argue about some new positions that are being created and whether those are the right things to do, but really where we have wiggle room is on the projects, capital projects, things like that. That's it.
Okay, thanks. Isha?
So I wanted to go back to Roland's comment, particularly with the North Acton Fire Station. I'm not aware of the exact timeline for when that fire station is happening, but last I heard, there were delays on the project, if I recall correctly. So I'm just wondering about the timing for the proposed personnel, bringing on these new positions versus the timing of the fire station actually getting done. Because if it happens that the fire station is not going to be actually running at full speed until many months after it's delayed, then it doesn't make sense.
It's almost finished.
Okay.
And the initial plan is to staff it with current staffing levels. But I think that it's relevant to us to consider that long-term probably is not going to be a solution. And at some point, they will need to add staff. And my understanding is that when they add fire staff, it's in groups of 8 for shift reasons.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else, Isha, or does that answer your kind of where you were?
That was one thing I thought of as Roland was.
Yeah. So at least that's, new staffing of fire personnel outside of the 2 new, medic positions is not in our plan for this year. And they haven't really brought that up yet on a timeline. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, with regard to headcount, as you saw from our budget and from our point of view document, if you're looking at the school budget, you're looking 79% of the budget is salary and wages. For the town, it's 72%. So it averages out to about 3/4 of our budget is locked up with salary and wages. And every time you had a headcount, that just goes on for perpetuity. If we need a town engineer, we need a heavy equipment mechanic, we need someone to plow the roads. We don't need another administrator. For whatever reason, I think they could be absorbed by other town personnel. It's not that the issue isn't, the need isn't there, but some of these things are sort of temporary, at least as a short range, maybe 2 to 5 years, and the issue may handle itself. But I'm just not I don't think it's a wise idea to add any superfluous headcount that really isn't a producer of something. Like it would fix the sidewalks or pave the roads or work at the transfer station or design this or approve that. It's not we don't need someone sitting in an office, checking emails. We can't afford it, and that's we normally don't say words like that, but 75% of our budget is already tied up in headcount and what it costs to support this headcount. So I think we really have to look strongly about adding any, especially superfluous people that just comes right out of the taxpayer's pocket, which is just too much. This is my opinion.
Thank you. Jason?
Just to add on to what Mike was saying, for those of you that listened to the school budget first read last week, was it last week? It was the week before. The school side is actually proposing a reduction of 11.5 FTE at the same time that we've already added 2 through ARPA, and we're adding at least 4 more in this upcoming budget. So that seems backwards to me. It seems like the balance is definitely starting to come off the rails here. I also would like to just remind people that we've hired a couple of people through ARPA, which has not been weighed in on by anybody other than the Board of Selectmen, other than the Select Board and the Town Manager. It's the very first time the town meeting is going to be able to weigh in on it. It's going to be after we've already hired at least 2 positions. I don't like that order of operations at all, and I think it's very difficult to say, well, we just hired them for 2 or 3 years of ARPA, and we'll easily be able to either fund it through regular budget increases in the future or get rid of those positions. It's very hard to do either of those things. So I think there's been some quick to buy. So not loving that. And then also just wanted to echo that a very close eye needs to be looked at the capital budgets. And to what Mr. Martin said earlier, no, a study is not a capital item. It's not tangible. There's no, just because it's a one-time thing does not make it capital. And it's not just a matter of semantics. If you want to use large amounts of money on a capital item, it's got to be something tangible. And then finally, also with regard to what Mr. Martin said on the whether or not the town has visibility into the school district's long-term capital plans and whether the school has impact into the town's side, we have to stop this us versus the select board and the school committee has to stop this us versus them. Together, they are the elected leaders of the town. They have to be paying attention to what the town needs. And this is not leadership. You can't have point both ways. Sure, you don't have tons of visibility into the other budget, and also you're probably not willing to be that open with the visibility. This is what ALG is supposed to support, but at the same time, if you're not willing to have other people take a look at it, who are trying to take a holistic view of it, then we're getting back to this us versus them, town versus gown, which is just not a way for the taxpayer to come out on top. So please keep that in mind.
Is there a precipitating event that leads you to make that statement?
I do not like the concept that the town has come out with a $70+ million capital improvement plan. The school side came out front ran them by a couple of years with a $20-some-odd million capital improvement plan. And just now that we're saying we need to try and reconcile them, which was one of the main thrusts of our most recent FinCom only meeting, and now to be told, well, no, we don't have visibility into that. That's the precipitating event. yeah, you don't have visibility into it, but you're the town leaders, so you've got to play nicely. There's only one tax bill, so everybody has to pay attention to. It's not just grabbed for my side; it's pay attention to the town.
Okay. As far as the definition of capital goes, we purposefully asked for feedback so that we can create a definition of capital that is at least has some level of buy-in for all interested parties. If we stick to our guns that capital is capital and a one-time thing that is not specifically a capital item does not count, and nobody else buys into that, we will just continue forward with being on different pages. So when we bring all of the suggestions to the table and decide how we want to define capital, we should consider Mr. Martin's suggestions and anything else we get from the schools and from the select board. Also, I think that the statement regarding how the town manager answered our questions regarding capital and said that the list is a projected list of potential capital needs 10 years out. It's not this is what we plan to do and when we plan to do it exactly. And the purpose for us is to look at both of those potential lists and at least try to guess where things might actually need to be paid for that would overlap, that would be very expensive to do in similar years. So that's our design in trying to merge those two lists in a way so that we can look for those potential pitfalls. But neither list is set in stone in date or in actually pushing forward the project. So I just wanted to make those comments. Steve, did you have something else to say?
Yeah, just getting back to the definition of capital, we can certainly take Dave's comments into consideration, but there is also the state DOR and the GASB requirements, which they also define capital. So it's not, we can't create a unique Acton Boxborough definition of capital. It has to at least conform to the generally accepted standards for government agencies. And like I said, the state has their own definitions. So.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on the town budget? Okay. Moving on quickly, hopefully, to the point of view slide 6 discussion. I want to do two things with the point of view. One, in regard to slide 6, which I'll go ahead and share right now real quick. This one. Can you all see that? And if I do this, do you still see the slide?
Yes.
Good. Excellent. And then I want to say the following in regards to this slide. Our sourcing on the slide states that the data comes from the 2020 census. After a lot of investigation, it's come to our attention that only some of the information from the 2020 US Census has actually been released. The data that we are presenting on this slide has not yet been updated. And if you go to census.gov, it shows that the data they are displaying are projections based on the 2015 American Community Survey. Those projections stopped in 2019. They have not yet been updated. The dates are right next to each data point. They haven't been updated with real or projected data. So the sources in our current document are outdated and can't be reproduced. The sites originally used for this information appear to be referencing data sources that have numbers that either Christy and I have looked at a couple of times and they've changed. So they're using some subset of information that changes every time we've gone to the site to sort of look at the source information. And since it's not verifiable, and doesn't reflect even what is currently on this slide. At this time, I'd prefer to pull the slide from our FY23 POB and determine to get it right for FY24 and move on with our lives. So I will entertain a discussion and potential motion to that effect. Go ahead, Adam.
I would also move to pull that slide based on that explanation.
Is there a second?
So what part of the slide is actually current? Does it make sense to only include the current data, or would it not give the complete picture?
I think it wouldn't give the complete picture because it's a mix of years data. It's a mix of actual projection and old and
that, but which of these data points are old is what I'm asking.
as far as I can tell, the data that's on here from the sourced sites is different, and it's some of it is different than what's on the US Census site.
So it's difficult to even figure out. Yeah, then I would second.
Okay. Now we'll go ahead and discuss that, and I will definitely hear from Mike.
You will. The is more than one data source for these. Some of them are town related, some of them for different housing advocate agencies. They sort of all get their data in one form or another from the government. I want to know specifically what line item and how much of a difference you're talking about. Do you really think the population has changed? Like especially the age distribution. I know culturally the demographics have changed, but I think they're probably as right as you're going to get, especially about the community. I don't know what your specific issue is.
Well, I have several issues. One is that if I follow your data sources, if I follow what you've got in every case, I'm not coming up with this data. I am coming up with changed numbers. We've referenced Wikipedia, which is incredibly problematic. We should not in a financial document be referencing Wikipedia.
Right, I was following the guidelines from prior point of views.
And the census data, if you go to US Gov Census, it specifically shows you that this data is a mishmash and it's not updated since 2019. So I don't feel like we need this slide in order to tell the whole story that we're trying to get across to the population. And I don't like the idea that if somebody came along and tried to click on a link and access the source of this data, they're not going to find it.
Well, they will find it. I found it. The issue is not that we found the source, but you're saying if the source is correct or not correct.
You know,
the point that we need to be aware of, if you just step back and look at not at a micro level, but at the broad picture, is that, you know, Acton is getting older, they're getting more diverse. And that's really what you need to know from the message. You quantify how much older or how much more diverse. We could debate that, but those are the facts. And I think if you hide this, then you're really hiding the fact that Acton is getting diverse, and Acton is getting older, and Acton is getting older.
Okay, thank you. Christy?
Everything Mike just said that we want to highlight about the changing population of Acton is actually in the previous slide, both the aging of Acton and the increase in diversity. And I can, with anyone who wants to go through, I'm sorry, yes. I'm very confused. That's a different version of the slide than I have. My slide is dated 12/22/21.
Yeah, I'll just go off of that because mine's dated 12/9.
Okay.
But I take your word for it.
it has the same information of a breakdown of our racial demographics and age. Yeah. I can talk to other people if they want.
What is it you don't like?
This is the data you think is important to include. Slide 6 data I don't want to get into right now, but it's a mess.
Does anybody else have any comments on the slide? Okay. We have moved and seconded, pulling the slide from this year's point of view. Adam, would you care to do a roll call vote?
I can do that. Let me pull my notes up so I can go down the list. Let's start with Jason Cole.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I couldn't tell what he said.
Aye.
Thank you. Christine Russell,
Aye.
Christy Anderson,
Aye.
Steve Noon,
Aye.
Isha Gangali,
Aye.
Roland Warden,
Aye.
Dave Wellinghoff,
Aye.
Mike Majors,
Nay.
and I will vote aye.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to move on to our next item, which is a discussion of the FY23 school budget. This is a preliminary discussion because there was a preliminary presentation by the superintendent to the school committee. Did Jason or Isha, do you have any information you'd like to share from that meeting specifically, or should we just kind of open a general conversation?
I mean, there were a few major points made, I guess. So one was that the reserves were actually larger than they had done, I think, last year. And I'm trying to pull up the exact amounts. They did call for the reductions of several staff. But there were increases in the budget overall, which amount to an increase of about 3.69% from last year. Most of which, as was earlier commented on, are compensation budget items. I just noticed that there was actually a line item budget that was released in preparation for the meeting this Thursday. So I've had a chance to just glance over it earlier this evening. And in general, it seems to be in line with what was discussed at the previous meeting. But I haven't had a chance to, really study it. Jason?
The one highlight is that that they are still over $2 million unreconciled. So, and they had sent out a call to the school committee to come back at the next meeting with whether they want to use reserves, whether they want to use reserves, more cuts, or potentially touching OPEB. What were the reducing the OPEB contributions? So they wanted the school committee members to do their homework and come back and figure out how to close that. I believe it was $2.1 million hole that they had for this next meeting. This next meeting is not going to be the final say on it. So if we want to stick to our guns about please don't reduce your OPEB contributions, now's the time.
Well, and I think there was also a question about what the reserve level ought to be, right? So I think that was sort of an open question, and they were soliciting input from the committee. So I think that's, I think our sort of conversations over the last few months can certainly perhaps bolster that to some extent. At least I'm hoping it will.
So there's several things I think that we need to look at as far as the school budget is first off, if they just went and did everything that they felt they needed to do as far as covering what they've got now and what they absolutely can't do without, they ended up with a 5.2% increase, which obviously is not achievable. And part of that is due to issues related to the pandemic. Most of that is issues related to the pandemic. So in order to get that number down to the 3.5% that they had projected in ALG, they are talking about cutting 3 bus driver positions that are currently unfilled, an assistant superintendent position, some security, capital projects manager, high school clerical part-time support, 3 high school teaching positions that potentially could capture some declining enrollment, and so enlarging class sizes, an elementary special ed position, and grounds personnel, and then their all-day K tuition assistants, all of the classroom assistants in the elementary school. This is what was presented to the school committee as potential ways to bring them back down towards that 3.5% increase. So obviously the school committee had many thoughts about not wanting to do many of those cuts. So I think we need to kind of chime in on where we stand on whether those cuts all seem appropriate, especially with the school cutting while the town is hiring, potential use direction of ARPA funds. There's a reason we asked the town to hold some back, and potential greater use of reserves than we generally would recommend. So, thoughts? Christy?
The only cut on that list that I am explicitly concerned about is the idea of reducing the all-day K assistance. To me, that, while for a smaller group of people, I'm sure for those people has a huge benefit. I'm curious, it's a relatively recent move to all of the elementary schools having classroom assistants. Wondering if there would be the potential of going back to schools paying for it themselves through their fundraising if deemed that the school committee is against that.
It's not equity based, so they'll never go back to that.
Okay. I have children in this school. I will continue to have children in this school. I'm kind of feeling like this is a bed the school committee has made. And I don't like that they have to make cuts, but if those are the cuts that have to be made, then it needs to be run that way.
Okay. Jason?
I think that the ARPA allocation is not appropriate between the municipal side and the school side. I would like to see a little more evenness between the two entities. I also think that it's just bad politics to be laying people off on the school side while hiring on the town side. And as for the school assistants, I think it's unfortunate that that's probably going to be one of the easier things for them to chop, because it's a kind of an all or nothing thing. They've got tough cuts ahead of them, and they didn't have a 7 out of $35 million windfall come into them the way that the municipal side had. So I definitely think that there's a balance to be struck.
Okay.
And given that the budget is still, in this latest version, is coming out to 3.69% over last year's budget, And what was ALG's request? And
That's
five?
only if they do all these cuts, Isha.
Right, exactly. No, but even with all the proposed cuts now, the second round is still 3.69% over last year's. So.
Steve?
So help me out. What do we think the assessment looks like now?
The net assessment for the towns, from both towns, is to the tune of $83,902,950.
And our piece, the last ALG plan I looked at, which is I'm sure out of date, was we had an assessment around 69 million, something like that.
70 now, yeah.
So,
70 now.
so sorry, so that's the total one for Acton is 70,491,592. That's what it's working out to.
Okay, so that's more than the ALG plan. Okay.
So that is an increase from prior year assessment of 4.36%.
So my recollection is that that ALG plan still had $1 million hole in it, with that lower number in it, and use of $1 million in reserves, if I'm recalling the plan correctly. So if anything, we've increased the ALG deficit to maybe $1.5 million or something. Yeah, could be more. I don't know. If I remember my calculations correctly, about 1.4 was all the free cash that we could free up and stay within the 3% floor for free cash. So it sounds like we got a hole we can't fix with reserves. Back in October and November, I think I might have floated the idea of if you were going to have an override, now was the time to talk about it, and I got kind of shushed. And everybody said, no, we're not going to do that. So the simple calculus is if you rule out an override for this year, and by the way, it's way too late to start the process now, and we won't give on the 3% floor that I think, given the bond rating commentary we got the last time, we shouldn't, then all you have left is cuts. Whether you like them or not, whether but we basically don't have anywhere else to go. I'm not in favor of going below the 3% floor. As I said, I'm concerned that we're going to settle collective bargaining agreements in excess of what we provided. All you have is cuts. As far as what to cut, OPEB's a great target because it's putting money away for a time far off in the future, and these cuts they're talking about are here and now. But as pretty much a rule of thumb, since regionalization, the schools have not put as much as they should be putting into the OPEB trust. I have no doubt in my mind if it gets cut this year, it will never be restored to even the level they're at. So all the work that's been done all these years to get it where it is will be for naught. Yeah. I will say the town's still in good shape. So, my thoughts are don't go below the 3% floor on free cash and don't cut OPEB. And other than that, they're going to have to figure out what to do about the budget. And has the town been in this kind of a shape before? Yeah, we have, but not for a long time. But it happens every 10, 15 years.
Okay, thanks. Adam?
Yeah, I agree 100% with Mr. Noon's comments about not going below the 3% floor and not taking into the OPEB. I would also like to point out, and I was going to bring this up during the liaison reports, that one of the public commenters at the select board meeting last night mentioned that the feds just changed the rules on ARPA such that every ARPA grant awarded under $10 million can now be applied 100% to revenue replacement. So if we propose to the select board and the town manager and the school committee that instead of using some of the ARPA funds to grant new projects that we couldn't normally put in the budget and instead pull that money back into use for revenue replacement, that might be enough to cover this this gap.
Christy?
Please forgive me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't using our funds just be kicking the can down the road? It's not repeatable money.
So some of this is backfill for lost revenue. Some of the things that are having to move into the operation budget used to be covered by like the community ed budget, which was completely depleted during COVID. So if the revenue lost from community ed were backfilled from ARPA, then they could pull that out of the operating, those custodial costs and certain costs out of the ARPA budget. The operational budget.
How much of the hole would that fill?
Let me look while Jason talks.
I just want to say that yes, in a very real sense, this is kicking the can down the road. This is not going to solve the structural issues of 4% increase year over year forever for compensation when you can only raise taxes at 2.5%. So yes, in a very real sense, this is just kicking the can down the road. But if this avoids an override for 1 more year or 2 more years, it's absolutely worth doing. And furthermore, it's a terrible idea to take this found money and do wants. I believe Roland talked about how a bunch of this stuff is wants already. Ace of Parliament House is a want; it's not a need. I would much rather keep the employees than spruce up a building we haven't needed for the entire time that we've owned it. So yeah, it may only avoid an override by an extra year, maybe 2 years. Hey, it's a 3-year program. Maybe we get away with all 3 years. That's still better than pissing away found money on wants just because we happen to have it now.
I don't have those total numbers, Christy. It's a few $100,000, but I'm not sure exactly which buckets would fall under the revenue replacement. Go ahead, Roland. And then Mike.
Yeah, I agree with what Jason just said. Again, it boils down to needs versus wants. And I'd rather see the budget gap, use that ARPA money to take care of that budget gap and to lay people off and get rid of services that are needed. Instead of spending money, either it's CPA money or ARPA money to redo that Ace of Parliament House. I mean, that's ridiculous, wasted money. And I'm sure there's some other projects like that. That money is just spent frivolously. And it just will have better need. Even if it kicks the can down the road for, as Jason just said, 2 or 3 years. Or even a year. People's livelihoods at stake. Our kids' education is at stake. It's the reputation of the town as well. And I just feel that, use the money that we have to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, the ARPA money was really for recovery. And I think the school is looking at it as almost like found money to fill in some gaps and that were always there. So I agree with Jason. I agree with Roland that I don't think we need to go into more debt and spend the money just because it's they got this gift. And, some of that money really hurts you rather than help you, like paying for the unemployment insurance, where you're paying people to stay home. That's why they created the labor crisis today, where you can't get people to work because we paid them too much money to stay home. So it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I'm not in support of this program.
Adam. Adam.
Sorry, my hand was still up. I forgot to lower it.
All right, Christy.
Let Steve go first.
Steve.
I just raised my hand.
No.
You've been up there for a while.
He wants to hear what you're going to
Already
say.
spoke once.
I was just going to go over the math a bit. So I think the town ALG number is around 39 million. The schools is around 70. So that's 109, and Minuteman is, I don't know, almost 3. So we're close to 112 million in expenses. The revenue, I believe, is 109 without the $1 million in assumed reserve use. So we've got a $3 million hole, of which we can, if we use everything but the 3% floor, we can plug maybe a half of it. The town may not want to hear this, but traditionally the ALG solution is to divide the baby 2/3, 1/3. That would mean the schools take $1 million cut and the town takes a $500,000 cut, and that's how we balance the budget, unless we can find some revenue somewhere else, untaxed levy capacity, overlay reserve. There's a few other places you could look, but
I don't think we have any untaxed levy capacity, do we? Didn't we spend it all?
We spent it all, but I thought Brian said when they had the tax classification hearing that they created a little bit.
Yeah.
We may have to be dealing with a little bit here and a little bit there to try and close the gap to something that can be handled by cuts. But essentially, that's where we sit. It's a very uncomfortable position to be sitting in right now. When's the next ALG meeting, Christine?
Thursday.
Thursday.
It's Thursday.
All right. So you're not going to have any new information?
Who knows? Hopefully everything will be updated and we'll get some new information. It's an ever-evolving situation.
All right. So I'll just reiterate what I said. Don't touch OPEB. Don't go below 3%. Christine,
do you have any feelings about ARPA funds for revenue replacement for the school before I move away from you?
I agree with Jason in the point that you had the select board being in pretty much total control of the ARPA funds. While they certainly allocated some to the schools, did they allocate enough? Probably not. But then we also have the water district and the PFAS problem that could use some money too. So how do you divide up the ARPA funds? I don't know. If a more school biased distribution would get us halfway home, I'd be in favor of it.
Okay, Christy,
I withdraw for now.
Adam,
I
And
was just
maybe-
going to say that I think it's really important that we get kind of a consensus from the finance committee members tonight on what direction we want to steer ALG on Thursday with regard to covering these deficits.
agreed. Isha, go ahead.
I actually just had a question for anyone that might know the answer. So, at what level of OPEB underfunding is it considered to be sort of critical or, irreversible, basically?
Steve, you want to take that one?
Yeah, there's no real critical point, not that you can calculate, because OPEB liabilities are based on pyramids of assumptions.
Right.
Historically, the schools have been putting 800-900, I don't know if they ever got to $1 million dollars a year into the trust fund. Had they been matching the town's level of funding in those years, they would have been putting $1.3, $1.4 million into the trust fund. So, however, I would give the town an A+ on their funding. Certainly, AB is doing well compared to, say, other school districts, which is how they'll look at it. But the taxpayers of Acton certainly have the right to look at it in terms of, why would one spending authority do so much better job than the other? Because it is, as I think Jason said, we all live in one tax bill here. It's not like we have two different fiscal houses. And the underfunding OPEB is the ultimate act of kicking the can down the road. It's a long road, but it's a big can.
But at the point at which, you have to pay the piper, then my assumption is that it comes back to haunt the town as well as the school district.
The example I gave what seemed like an eternity ago at the first town meeting when we discussed this, it's kind of like, waiting until your kid was 16 to think about saving for college.
Right.
You should have been doing it all along. If you didn't do it when the time comes, it can't be done. And that's kind of what was happening with OPEB. It was an unrecognized liability in the public sector. And the Government Accounting Standard Board recognized it and began to deal with it probably 10 years ago. So are we in better shape than a lot of places? Yes, we are. Have we got enough put aside? Probably on the town side, yes. On the school side, probably not. Now, their strategy is to wait until the Middlesex pension liability is fully funded, which is at least 10 or 12 years away in theory, and then overfund OPEB for all the years that they underfunded it. And it's a legitimate strategy on paper. My experience in dealing with Middlesex pension over the years is that they'll never be fully funded. cutting back, and more importantly, politically cutting back the OPEB funding makes it just that much harder next year to restore
Of course.
it. You know, yeah, you got $200,000 out, so now you need $400,000 to get back on track. Is that going to happen? No, it's not.
Right.
So for me, I think that we directed the town as far as allocation of ARPA money first and foremost to revenue replacement and buckets that were hit by COVID. We particularly requested that they not allocate the full 7 million because they had 4 years to determine how that money was to be spent. And it was unclear yet what impact COVID was going to have on the various budgets. We managed to go through most of the pandemic not seeing a lot of hits and being able to offer low budgets and still provide all the services. And now here we are. And, 3 years in, we're finally seeing the actual impacts of COVID, which is one of the reasons we asked them not to allocate all the funds. And their answer was to allocate in sections, leave some money open for interpretation and how it would be spent. So I personally feel that it would make sense to recommend revenue replacement use of some of the ARPA funds, especially the second and uncategorized funds from the ARPA bucket. So I'm just putting that out there for comment. Christy.
I have heard, I believe, what Jason and Roland specifically were saying about the school. My concern is that there is a potential that the school's budget has outgrown a sustainable level. So I am very comfortable with any sort of revenue replacement, such as the community ed. I'm also very comfortable with spending the money, ARPA money, for things that are effectively one-time expenses related to COVID that are incurred because of COVID, but that will hopefully dissipate the need for over time those more unforeseeable expenses. If we as a district really cannot afford to keep having classroom assistants or something like that, then I'm worried that just filling the hole with the ARPA money is going to mean that we're going to have 3 more years of growth on projects like that, or just more time in which the school does not do the harsh cuts that might be needed. I would love more information about specifically the COVID-related expenses, what has happened now, one-time things. How much of it is that the staffing levels, budget, et cetera, have gotten out of whack with what can be afforded within the reasonable increase, and how much of it is that schools have just been hit by a bunch of one-time things with COVID.
Okay. Mike?
First I want to say I agree with Steve about some of this OPEB stuff. And the school really has taken a slower approach to funding OPEB. It's going to be, they won't have their current needs fulfilled until the year 2060, 39 years, 2 generations. And I think their problem is going to get worse before it gets better. And I think it'll just accelerate. They have to be more aggressive in their approach. And they might have to take a hit. They might have to cut costs, and it's not impossible. It might be painful, but I look at it as something that's got to be done. With ARPA, the revenue replacement is a legitimate need for. I know it is for the town, and well, if it is for the school, that might be debatable. But it really was intended to not just cover 1 year's worth of revenue replacement, but they wanted the receiver of those funds to It should last them at least this year plus 2 more. And I don't know if the school was really taking a long view of this versus just figuring out how to cover their current losses. I just think they need to be more frugal and take a longer range view at some of these issues. And I think they should not be spending that ARPA money. At least all of the ARPA money the way they think they can. This thing would be irresponsible.
Any other comments? Okay, so it sounds like for the upcoming ALG meeting, we need to understand how much of the current bind the school is in would be specifically revenue loss due to COVID, and what would qualify for ARPA on that particular front before we would firm up any particular recommendation on any funds directed that way. If it's a long-term problem or a short-term problem specifically caused by COVID, that those one-time funds would even that out. We still think that the budget seems to have gotten to a point where it may have been unsustainable anyway. And so tightening the belt and potential cuts to personnel might be the only answer. And a better understanding of exactly where they think they'll be after their runs through the budget and what difference we're at as far as a gap for what needs negotiating. Did I kind of cover everything? I'm gonna grab Adam because his hand was up first, and then I'll go to Christy. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so I'm mentally here trying to summarize the committee's comments and kind of prioritize. And I'm going to bring Christy's comment to the fore that really the only way to solve this long term is to cut. And I think she used the word to cut drastically. And really, you have to start cutting earlier rather than later. So I think in summary, if I'm, at least my sense of what I think the committee might stand behind would be, number one, would be cuts, both the town and the school. Number two would be using the free cash and the ARPA funds, down to reasonable levels. Number three would be do not take money out of the OPEB contribution. And I think, does it stop there, those three items? And would that be an appropriate prioritization?
That sounds basically what I heard. What we didn't discuss, and I'd like to. Go ahead, Christy.
I'm afraid I might have misspoken or been understood stronger than I meant. I am wondering whether the budget has outgrown sustainability. I don't necessarily think that it has. I would like to understand that specifically with the school budget. That is one of my concerns, that if we fill these gaps, and that's what I was talking about, kicking the can down the road, is how much of this is at an unsustainable level. I don't remember saying needing drastic cuts, but apparently, according to Adam, I did at one point also. So I just would like to soften what apparently I said.
Okay. Well, I think that if you look back at our conversations year over year, we probably all would agree that the teachers' contracts, the personnel contracts, are an unsustainable level of increase year over year. What we didn't speak to, and I'd like an opinion or two on, is the school's use of reserves. If they would like to use a larger chunk of reserves, then they typically would, to help with covering some of this. Is this the type of rainy day in which we would go, well, that makes sense? Go ahead, Roland.
it would make sense. I just don't think they should drop below the floor. Because it wasn't that long ago. Wasn't that long ago. And I know Steve can remember this, and so can Mike, who's been on the board for a while. Steve for a while. At the town, that the schools got in trouble with their credit agencies because they were relying on reserves and didn't have a lot of reserves. They didn't have a lot in E&D. And they've been doing great strides in getting their E&D up. So do not drop below the floor so that they don't get in trouble with the agencies going forward. I think that's very important. Drive home. If they need to use some of that money to fill the budget gap, yeah, by all means, just do not violate that floor.
Okay. So the same floor standard we have for town, also for school. Okay.
Yeah, I believe so.
All right, Adam?
I was just going to ask if that was the same level we should be using, 3%, 5%. I think we had discussed that in the past, and you just, I think, confirmed that. So thank you.
Okay. Steve? You're muted.
Well, we're still talking about kicking cans down the road. So using more reserves or taking their reserves down to the floor, doesn't solve the systemic problems. It just gets us through this year. Then the issue becomes back kind of where we started the conversation about, capital planning and, and where we were last week or whatever it was when Alan and Charlie were talking about Conant School, is there going to be a new Conant, if there isn't, then, if you take a little hit on your bond rating, it's not the end of the world because we won't be doing a lot of bonding. But if there is, it's a problem. So, I think there's going to be a lot of places to find a little money and very few to find a lot of money. But if incrementally we can pick up a little money there, fine. But I wouldn't use it to try and solve most of the problem, because once again, like the OPEB money, it's hard to get money back into reserves, because you have to raise your assessments over and above your costs that year to replenish, and that can get very unpopular.
It's one of the things that actually fell off their plan this year, if they go for the tightened budget, is not replacing some E&D money that they intended to replace.
Well, when you're in a bad year, that's what happens. You need every penny for what you perceive you need to be, and that's going to be a we can do without that this year. So again, it's very much in my mind like the OPEB. Once you tap that money, then it's going to be very hard to get it back up to where it was.
For the record, same thing with the capital improvement plan. They zeroed that out last fiscal year. They brought some of it back this year, and they're not going to be able to bring it back fully in this current budget as they had hoped. So, to your point, Steve, once the commitment is gone, it's very hard to get it back.
Yeah. Mike, is your hand still up from the last comment, or do you want to speak? Adam.
So it sounds as though I should change the number 2 and number 3 priority, such that 1 would be balancing through cuts, which has a long-term lasting solution to budgetary problems. Number 2 would be balancing by capturing more of the ARPA funds through revenue replacement. And then number 3 would be balancing from free cash and E&D such that we leave those in a healthier position, or as healthy a position as possible. Does that sound right?
That's what I hear. Christy, go ahead.
What I'm hearing is not what I heard Adam say was, first of all, make cuts. And I think that's not what I was hearing from Jason, at least, was that we should be spending some of the ARPA money. Did Adam not say what I think he said?
I think he's, so the school is looking at potential cuts, and the sense of this committee is that yes, they should be looking at these potential cuts. That just gets them down to 3.6%. Is that
For me, for me, it would be a more nuanced, yes, ARPA money, less so reserves. Definitely ARPA money is reasonable and a good use for revenue replacement and some of the other COVID one-time expenses. But the other stuff should be covered with cuts, and ideally not. So I would, in some ways, put ARPA above. They're kind of, cuts in ARPA are not so entirely separate in my brain.
Well, if I may, the way that the superintendent had laid out some of the cuts, some of the cuts, they were, yes, absolutely, we just need to cut these. And then some were, geez, we wish we didn't have to, but this is where we go next.
Okay.
The things that are, yeah, go ahead and cut it. They should cut it. They shouldn't try and find revenues for it elsewhere. If they can legitimately cut something, cut it. But if something's on the fence and ARPA can cover it, maybe ARPA should cover it.
okay? Well, let's get that identified first, and then we can have a easier conversation about prioritizing. But this gives us at least some talking points, questions to ask, a direction to go in for the next ALG meeting. So thank you all very much. Christy, did you want to say something else, or your hand just hanging out up there? All right, it's a Simpsons hand. Okay, thank you. So next up is Finance Committee business, and I'm gonna actually have Roland start this one because things are a brew with CPC.
Thank you, Christine. I observed the select board meeting last night. And I'll start off with the projects, and then I'll go into CPA surcharge. So one of them that hit the medium, and Adam, you can jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but you sent out that email earlier. Asa Parlin House is a request for $1,064,000. Just push it to medium. Woodlawn Cemetery to restore the old gravestones. $200,000. That was more, I believe, on the high side. I'm sorry. Woodlawn Cemetery. Here it is. The Woodlawn Cemetery Chapel to make it ADA accessible. I know 200,000. So here's the what Adam has up. Here's what we have. What they're looking at. The Asa Parlin House, as I said, $1,064,000 to me shouldn't be even considered at all. We're in a position where we have serious budget issues with the school, things like that, and we're considering spending $1,064,000. Think of the optics on that. Put the town in a very bad situation. Now, the ones that are at the top, I agree with to a certain degree. Gardner Playground phase, landscaping. 100,000 is a little high. I mean, and also keep in mind that these have not been voted on by CPC yet, and they haven't come up with their funding levels. So okay, we can let that stuff go. Admin support, okay, etc. And you can take that down for now. So the discussion then went on to should right now the CPC surcharge is 1.5% on your tax bill. You can look at it, looking at CPA. I wrote the numbers down, but I don't seem to have them right now in front of me. Town this year was awarded during the CPA funding rounds over $500,000. Came up with another bonus round and $50-something thousand because the governor gave another $10 million for funding with the budget surplus. I feel that the state government should not be taking budget surpluses anymore and put any money into CPC. You already have the CPA. You already have the funding mechanism for that, and that money can be used on other things such as infrastructure, substance abuse, mental health abuse, things like that, where it's more dire of a need, in my opinion. So the conversation was to bring the full CPA surcharge up to 3%. And I feel that members of the select board, it's 3% on the valuation of your home. Not a flat tax rate, it's 3%. First $100,000 is not taken into account. Would mean on my individual tax bill would go from around $500 a year to over $1,000. Basically, it's a regressive tax. And Dean Charter's comment last night, Selectman Charter, was that he was fully aware, or actually made the comment, I'm sorry, that we have been, that they need to be upfront about the cost of the average family tax bill. Then Jim Snyder granting, Christine can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have the exact language that he said, but that we are concerned with tax increases on the average family within Acton. And a lot of it more concerns me with the senior population, with the people who are retired, are not working, or people who are in positions where they don't get big raises or don't get any at all in a given year. And it becomes, so by raising the taxes on in the CPA surcharge, people are going to argue, oh, it's not a tax. It absolutely is a tax. The tax on your tax bill. It comes on your tax bill, it's a CPA surcharge, it's a tax. And it's a regressive tax. It hurts the lower income people and does so the rich. And if we keep raising taxes higher and higher and higher, this town, you're just saying how unaffordable the town was, and that was especially with the Renters Advocate. Well, what's going to happen when we raise the CPA tax bills? Christy pointed out. What are you going to do as a landlord? You're going to pass it on to your tenants. Bottom line, rents are going to go up again. Rents are going to go up anyway because of an increase in taxes. So it's become more aggressive. It's going to end up taking seniors and driving them out of the town. On a personal note, I sent the select board my thoughts on that as a private citizen, not in my role in FinCom. And I said, this continues by the time my son graduates high school, I won't be able to afford to live in this town. I'll have to move out. And then my house will get sold and people come with kids and it impacts the schools, right? My neighbor's the same way. So I do not support this. And the net result is, yeah, you get more on the tax revenue and you get some more on your initial match on the state. And then you qualify for the bonus rounds 2 and rounds 3. And that would total this year an additional $65,000 in the bonus rounds. There are years that, as Steve can attest, in the past that we've had more CPA funds than we had requests. This year's the opposite. There's more requests than they have funds. But many years it doesn't. So they've done one land purchase, Wright Hill, where they bonded. The other one was Stonefield Farms with their development rights piece last year at town meeting, which has been bonded. Even if they dissolved CPA, the town's still on the hook for those bonding costs, those bonding. I just don't feel that we should be raising the CPA surcharge above where it is now. I just feel it's going to hurt a lot of people. And the benefit, yeah, we get a benefit out of it, but if people just looking at, oh, we get extra money from the state in extra rounds 2 and 3, well, more and more states are, more and more municipalities have been adopting CPA, and the states had to kick in 10 million. Last year was 50 million. The year before that, I believe, was 50 million. Now you had $110 million. It could be used for a lot of other things. It could be given to schools. Maybe we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in, or to OPEB, or to any other type of funding mechanisms that benefit the citizens as a whole and not select cities and towns. I know Milton, when my relatives lived there, they shut down CPA. Other towns have adopted it. I just don't feel it's a good optics, especially during this time when we are funding a new fire station, a new twin schools, and our tax bills are going quite considerably, and now we're going to, oh, let's raise more taxes. Basically raising taxes. That's my take on it. I'd like to hear from other members and what they feel.
Okay, thank you, Roland. So yeah, so they are looking for input. They didn't just unilaterally make this decision. They brought it up as a first read. And it was interesting to me that Jim Snyder Grant stated that we were concerned about our budgets and how high taxes are, but then pivoted with our message and says, so we should rip the Band-Aid off and go all the way to 3%. So that's, when Dean brought up that taxes had gone up $500 a year for the last 3 years, plus continuing. So lots of different varying opinions about possible raises of any amount. It doesn't have to be the full 3%. So I would like the sense of the committee on this issue, and I'll start with you, Mike. You're muted.
I would say absolutely not. Adding another 3% because we're living in an age of 6% inflation that's going to last at least 3 to 5 years. So that combined with any other increase, the school budget out of control, this other 3% is not, it'd be nice to have, anybody would like to have extra money, but we don't need this extra 3%. Things can be budgeted over time. If they're talking about what they're going to use the 3% for, is it just to buy more open space? I think they really haven't built a case to justify the need. I say absolutely not. It hurts the taxpayer, young and old. Especially the elderly, and especially the renters, because the landlord will be passing on these costs to the renters, and then one more thing to bitch about. So I said absolutely not. It's just the statement of pulling the Band-Aid off the wound is ridiculous. We just leave it patch and hopefully it will heal. Leave the Band-Aid on. Don't raise the surcharge. We've seen enough. This is absolutely the wrong time and the wrong place to be doing this. And I think it's just being foolish. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, and for clarity for anybody who may, for some reason, watch our meetings at a later time, we are currently at 1.5%. It would be an increase to 3%. And these are leveraged funds of a varying degree, depending by year. Most recently, something about 28%. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, well, I agree with Mike. The timing of this couldn't be at a worse time. I think we'll be overriding 2.5 in the not too distant future, and who needs another 1.5% tacked onto that? And correct me if I'm wrong, Roland, because this is just me recollecting things, but when this thing started, there was much more community participation in it. Lots of community groups raising money to do projects. And a lot of them were on, public facilities or public land, but a lot of private money was raised to match the CPC funds. Larry Field, the lower fields. A lot of that money came from, different sports groups. And it seems to me recently what we get is mostly town projects that the town wants to do. And yeah, there's always open space, but we seem to have lost that whole community involvement in this. So it just becomes like an adjunct town capital budget with a bunch of projects.
Exactly.
And who needs that? I mean, we want to raise taxes for capital projects. We can raise taxes for capital projects. I don't know that open space, affordable housing, and recreation would be on the top of everybody's list for capital projects. But you are limited. If you raise the money, the tax rate to support CPC, you are limited to those three things.
You're affordable housing, recreation, open space, historic preservation, and it goes up to 3%. You think it's ever going to go back down to 1.5 or 1 or 2? It's not. No. And and as your taxes go up and your house valuation goes up, that's going to creep up as well. And Steve's absolutely right. There are more and more town projects on that than there are other. Other ones were restoring the steeple in West Acton Church that the town, that they do different events and the community's always invited and welcome, because if they rang the bell that was built by an apprentice of Paul Revere, or it's a Paul Revere bell, I forget which one, if they rang it, it would actually fall through the building. That. And Theater 3 was another one, Steve, if you recall, and one of them was doing the clock over at Town Hall, and some things with Town Hall and stuff like that, which is an historic building. But more and more over those years, Steve is absolutely right. It's becoming more and more town projects and not other. And a lot of these projects are leveraged, but as the town ones come in, less leverage.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it used to be that groups of people would get together and come before the CPC and say, yeah, we want to do this, and we're willing to raise X amount of money to do it. It never used to be the case that, the CPC would put up all the money for a project. But now it seems more and more that's what is being asked of them. So no, I for a lot of reasons I say no.
Christine, you're muted.
Good now? Okay, it popped up on my screen that I was muted and I hadn't touched anything. Jason, I saw your hand up briefly earlier. Did you still need to comment, or are you good?
It's all been said. No to the increase.
Okay, Christy?
I'm curious how this came up, why this is something they're talking about. But quickly, before we get into that, I know that for the Gardner Playground, they did a lot of fundraising. I don't know whether the phase we're on qualifies for any of that. And I remember the dog park. I don't remember whether that request ended up getting filled or not, but they also had raised. But I agree, it looks like it's largely the town stuff. And I'm really hoping you're not going to tell me that this reason this came up is because there were so many requests this year when the town made that huge Asa Parlin request. I don't think that should qualify.
I will say, as part of the discussion, this is ranked based on the select board sort of choosing buckets to then send over to CPC just as their general thoughts on which projects should be higher priority than others. And even they indicated and commented on the fact that they indicated that Asa Parlin was a lower priority than some of the the high priority items, despite the fact that it's the number one priority on their wish list for this year of things to get done. Adam, go ahead.
So it also sounds like maybe we should add this to our list of things for ALG. Maybe I'll put it as number 4 items. That sound about right? It sounds like the consensus of the FinCom is to direct or to recommend to the select board not to raise the CPA to 3% from 1.5%.
I definitely think we should make this recommendation to the select board. I'm not sure it needs to be done at ALG because I don't think it would come up since it's outside of the general budget. Christy.
I actually absolutely think this should be part of the ALG process. I know there are people who don't, but at the end of the day, the entire process of ALG is bringing together the sources of our tax increases, our tax bill. And CPA has been a wonderfully off to the side, not thought about too much, but it is a tax we pay. It's not a tax that we have any control or negotiation over what that is. But if the town is going to, or the select board is going to say, yeah, we need to increase this, they need to recognize that is within the context of all the other tax increases that are happening this year. I know it's not in the general town revenue, but ALG has to think about our tax bill in addition to what they're spending.
It's still, in my opinion, it's still a revenue source, right? You're still taxing the citizens for it. They can call it whatever they want to call it. It's still a revenue source, and they use it for town projects. So they use it for municipal projects. That it's a good point to bring up at ALG. If the consensus is not to support it, then let them know right there and then. We don't support this. It's a tax on the citizenry of the town during a very difficult time. Yep, it couldn't be worse about bringing it up in an absolute difficult time. And you're making the town that you're going to price many people that are not going to be able to afford to live here anymore, either rent or whatever, because it's making the town to elitist, basically, the way I look at it.
Okay, so I think I hear from everybody and agree that we do not support any increase to that assessment. Excellent. Anybody else have any other committee reports they would like to offer? Steve.
Yeah, the Health Insurance Trust met, and we did confirm the 10% rate increase. Had a fair amount of discussion about more details of how to implement it. I sadly have to report that there wasn't any discussion of going lower than 10. There was some possible discussion about even going higher, but we don't have enough data on the year to make anybody comfortable with that. So they stuck with the 10. Other than that, John Peterson, who is the chair of the Health Insurance Trust, is not running for re-election for the school committee. So our year, like every committee, runs through the end of June. John will drop off the school committee at town meeting. So I am the interim chair of the Health Insurance Trust, probably for one meeting. But I wouldn't be totally shocked if I got elected to be permanent chair. So.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Steve Barrett is my campaign manager.
Excellent. All right. I don't like to hear 10%. Never mind. It's definitely not going to be less than. Excellent. Anything else from anybody? Mike?
You're on
You're
mute if you're talking.
Okay. Just for the record, and I want this read into the record regarding the data in slide 6 and the sources of the data. If you were looked at all the footnotes and looked at the Massachusetts homelocator.com for Acton, Massachusetts, zip code 01720, you would see that all those numbers will be validated right in their charts. The sources of their data, the annual census demographic estimates and 5-year forecasts are based upon data produced by Earthy Demographics. Their estimates and forecasts use the latest US Census Bureau and annual American Community Survey as a starting point. They then combine additional data from multiple sources, including residential postal delivery counts from the USPS, a time series of county-to-county migration patterns from the IRS, building permits, housing starts, and local data sources that tested well against the most recent census. And they'll show you how they did their methodologies. They did school profile data, and from the National Center for Educational Statistics. Also, that data is updated 6 times a year. Most recently is October of 2021. So it's just the U.S. Census is one part of the data, a starting point, and then they add to it. And this comes from the state, not the federal government. So it's closer to home, and all state agencies use this data. And I challenge you to come up with different numbers. So I'm requesting that you reinstate slide 6 as accurate, unless you come up with, data on your own. I don't know what the agenda is or why you're doing this, but I firmly disagree, and I stand behind those numbers. We spent hours. I spent hours and weeks, many late nights researching this data, and because you feel it doesn't look right or serve your agenda, that's too bad. The numbers are the numbers. And we'll go from I'm worried, I'm willing to discuss it, but I stand by those numbers, and I'm requesting that they be reinstated unless you come up with proving that they're wrong. Period.
Great, thank you. That item has been moved on and voted, and I'm going to move on to minutes. If we could go ahead and approve November 23rd, December 6th, and December 14th minutes that were sent to the committee for review. I will take a motion on any of those. Or all of them.
So moved for all of them.
Second.
All right, excellent. We'll need a roll call vote. I'll let you go ahead and do that, Adam.
Sorry, bear with me while I make my notes here. This was a motion by Christy, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. I only am meticulous about this when we are doing roll calls. And the second was by
Isha.
Isha, thank you. Okay, here we go. Jason Cole.
Aye.
Christine Russell.
Aye.
Christy Anderson.
Aye.
Steve Newton.
Aye.
Isha Gangali.
Aye.
Roland Borden.
Aye.
David Wallenhoff.
Aye.
Mike Majors.
Yeah.
And I say aye.
Okay. Mike, I will reach out to you through email. I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate everybody's hard work tonight, and wish us luck in ALG, and I look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks. Stay safe, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Okay.
Adam, take it
Jason
away.
Cole. Jason Cole.
Aye.
Christine Russell.
Aye.
Christy Anderson.
Aye.
Steve Noon.
Aye.
Isha Gangali.
Aye.
Roland Borden.
Aye.
David Wellinghoff.
Aye.
Mike Majors.